Welcome everyone to our episode 106 of the podcast David Ortega B. We are going to have an honor guest today, Kimberley Palmiotto, and we are going to talk about navigating adolescence with your teens. So it's a topic that is interesting for everyone that is struggling with any kind of teenager. And I'm going to introduce Kimberley. Kimberley is an educational psychologist and clinical counselor, as well as a mom of 4 girls herself. She founded Nurturing Girls to help moms and girls navigate their way through adolescence and is an author of multiple books, including Marigold Girls and Not Your Grandma's Journal. So thank you, Kimberley, for being here. It's an honor to have you in the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah. And my first question is always, how did you arrive to this road of helping teenagers and becoming a counselor for these people that we all struggle with adolescence?
Yeah. So, I am a school psychologist or educational psychologist by trade. I've been doing this for over 20 years now. And so I've been infused in this whole child development world for a really long time. And so I've seen over and over again that a lot of issues really start to rise up in families when kids move from kind of elementary school into middle school and high school. That's when a lot of challenges arise. And then when I had my own kids, it really kind of got magnified for me once my kids went from elementary to middle school, because I was like, oh, I have all this information. And yet I was caught off guard and I was feeling like, oh my gosh, this is hard. Like, this is really hard. So that's when I kind of pivoted just a little bit, because I was seeing a lot of girls come in, particularly into my private practice, having a lot of difficulties with the mother-daughter relationship. And that's how Nurturing Girls was kind of formed, because I realized that there wasn't a lot of help for that particular targeted population, where understanding the changes that are happening during adolescence and how a lot of them are really normal, especially now we have this amazing research from the neuroscience community that's showing us how the teen brain works, that we didn't have that. Like when I was a teenager, they didn't have any of that. They just thought you went kind of from, being a child to being an adult. And the teenagers were just all hormonal. It's just all hormonal and they'll get over it and just power through. Well, now we have this really, really cool science to show us through the brain imaging and things like that, that there are really specific things happening in the teen brain that are causing some of these, what looks like hormonal craziness for parents. So when we understand that a little bit more, it's easier to really feel a little bit more empathy for them, but also help us navigate a little bit better.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I myself, I'm a father of a daughter that is about to go into that stage. Well, it's almost 2 years and she will start becoming an adolescent, and I certainly understand that, because she and her mother are kind of having a little bit of rough problems sometimes, and I just understand what happens, no? So
yeah.
And my first question is, what is the first thing that you notice in girls that they start doing or acting or behaving when they kind of switch on the adolescence hormonal pathway, let's say?
Yes. Well, I think one of the first things that we see, obviously, we see the physical part of puberty starting to pop up. But even before then, we're going to start to see our daughters start to kind of do this little practice of independence, where you might get a few eye rolls, you might get a little bit more talking back, you'll get some challenging, right? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of assert their own independence, but they're doing it in a way that they're kind of like tiptoeing out just a little bit, not really doing a full push yet, but just trying it out a little bit. you'll see that they start to navigate a little bit more towards friends, and they start worrying a little bit more about how they look, or maybe fitting in a little bit more with other kids. Sometimes in this early stage, you might see girls that were, let's say, like really into unicorns and pink and all of these things, now all of a sudden rejecting all of that, right? And no, I don't want to wear that dress. That's too, that's too kindergartenish or whatever it is. So those are little mini steps that you might see moving toward this push for adolescence.
Mm.
Yeah.
And is it is it this dialogue that they start doing, or as you mentioned, they start fighting for their identity just with the same gender? I mean, daughter, mother, or it can happen daughter, father also?
Oh, it can happen definitely with both. It will happen with both eventually.
Yeah.
I think it kind of starts with mom, and I think it becomes so pronounced with mom because as a mom, we are her kind of model, right? When she's looking to us, she's looking to us as, this is what a woman is like. This is what I'm going to grow up as. And so it's a very conflicting time for kids and adolescents with moms, because yes, she sees us as kind of the model of what she's going to be when she grows up. But in order to individuate and kind of be her own independent self and form her own identity, she's forced to almost reject us in a way, because that if she's too much like us, then she's not herself. So she's trying to figure out this really, it's kind of a dance, right? Of how do I still like merge those two things together so that I can be independent and yet still understand that my mom is this model of a woman that I'm going to be one day. So for a while, you will really see, that's when we see a lot of this talking back and a lot of arguing and a lot of debating between moms and daughters. And many times this is when, like, for example, I know in my house, my voice can be really annoying to her. She doesn't want to dress the way I dress. She doesn't, right? It's like all those things that you're like, it's so offensive, but really it's normal. But it's so hard to not take it personal, because like, what do you mean my shirt is obnoxious? I love this shirt.
It's my favorite.
Like,
no,
right? Yeah, she's like, no, that's awful. I can't believe you would even wear that. It's so disgusting, or whatever, right? Because she's like, I can't be you. I have to be me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was just thinking about something that probably can explain also what is happening, and you will go deeper into that, of course, if you want, about the brain. I think that it's sort of like watching yourself in a mirror and seeing the mom. I mean, the daughter is seeing the mom and is identifying things in the mom, in the image of the mirror, that she's not. First, she doesn't understand yet why do they have these characteristics, and second, they see things that they don't want to become sometimes because they are choosing something different. No, so
absolutely.
What happens in the brain?
So it's interesting, because what's happening in the brain from a teen standpoint is that it's going through a full reconstruction, right? Kind of, it happens also when they're toddlers, right? They go through this very big reconstruction of their brain, where they're having these huge growth spurts. They're taking so much information in and building all these neural pathways, while simultaneously kind of pruning the stuff out that they don't need and getting rid of it. So that's happening. But what's also happening is that they've got hormonal shifts that are influencing all of those things. And the actual development of the brain itself is kind of going back to front. So the frontal part of the brain is this prefrontal cortex, and that's what's responsible for the things like problem solving and executive functioning and organization and decision making, right? But back way deep is that limbic part, that amygdala part in the limbic part of your brain, that is really the survival mode. That's where that fight, flight, freeze comes in. It's the emotional center of the brain. Well, that's developing first for adolescence, and it kind of takes over. And then slowly but surely, by like mid-20s, it will make it all the way up to actually almost 30s now. They're finding that frontal lobe. So when you're seeing girls that are kind of giving those emotional responses to you. They look like they're really, quote unquote hormonal, or they're rejecting you and they're having these big emotional responses. That's why right now in that early, especially early phase of adolescence, that emotional part of their brain is taking over. It will hijack every other part if she's feeling elevated in any way, right? If she's feeling defensive, if she's feeling embarrassed, if she's whatever it may be, that's going to be magnified. Whereas normally we might have that feeling and we can rationalize it because that's the frontal lobe of our brain is kind of like, wait a second, do you really need to be that embarrassed? Do you need to be that outrageous right now? And you rationalize it a little bit based on your own decision making and problem solving. But for teenagers, they don't really have that skill yet. So since this is the part that's developing first, it's taking over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. It makes a lot of sense because it's like they are floating into chemicals that are those hormones, and that impedes the rationalization of what is happening, and they just go with the emotion, no? And I think that, as you mentioned, we are seeing that those attitudes even in people now, I dare to say, that are in their 30s or even their 40s, and they don't fully develop this capacity of turning off those emotions, no? And what can we do, or what can parents and moms do to regulate that or to understand that?
Well, that's a really great question. So I think first and foremost, even if she's rejecting us as kind of like a general model, our kids are definitely looking to us as kind of the barometer, right, of what they should and shouldn't do and how they can react and not react. So the biggest thing that we can do is to be that model. So when I say that, what I mean is if your daughter is having a really big reaction, I think innately we kind of get a little bristled ourselves, and we might react by saying, why are you doing that? Or you don't need to react that way, or, really kind of challenging, or without even meaning to shaming or belittling her, right? We never mean to do that, but sometimes it comes out that way because we felt a little defensive. If we instead can take a moment to just reflect back, like, oh, wow. If she says, let's say, for example, she's having a big emotional reaction about not being able to do something. And she says, I can't believe you're doing this. This is ridiculous. Why won't you let me have my iPad for however long I'm going to do it? So, let's talk about this for a second, because I can see you're getting really upset.
Yeah.
Like, it looks like you're really anxious, or it looks like you're really angry. Let's talk about that. Why do you think, right? So you're walking her down this problem solving way. Why do you think that I said it's time to turn off the iPad? And she might say something like, I don't know why, because you don't want me to have it. Well, actually, no, I did it because I was thinking. And then you start walking her down the road of how you came to that decision, right? I was thinking that if you didn't turn it off right now, you're probably going to be on it for another hour, and then you're going to go to bed, and we've talked before about how the screen time really impacts your sleeping. And if you don't get a good night's sleep, then it's hard for you to wake up in the morning and have a good day at school. So for me, that's why I'm telling you that I think it's a good time to get off, right? So what you're doing is step by step walking her through how you came to the decision you did, so that instead of it being an emotional reaction, it becomes more of a logical, rational understanding. And there might be times, I know there's times in my house when she's not ready to have that discussion. She's just in the emotional state, and that's okay. And in those moments, I have to say, you know what, I want to talk about this, but I need to take a break. So it's not you need to take a break, right? Because if I say to her, you need to take a break right now, she's going to be like, and she's going to freak out on me because she's like, don't tell me what I need to do. Instead, it's I need to take a break. So I'm going to take a break, and I'll come back to you in a few minutes. And then when I circle back, she's had a hot minute to calm down. I've had a hot minute to calm down, and then we can have that discussion. So
I was reflecting on the things that I say to my daughter sometimes when she wants to do some things that, of course, for her, they sound fun. They sound that she's what she wants to do, and she doesn't want to do homework or math or whatever it is. And I just ask her questions, and I try to elicit the answers from her. So I ask her, well, let's say that you don't do the homework, and let's say that you watch the iPad or watch an episode or whatever. What is going to happen with the homework? And I ask her the things, and she tells me, well, I will have to do it at night. And I just ask her, and how do you think me or your mom are going to be in terms of being with energy or tired, or what kind of mood? And she understands, and she says, well, you are not going to be in a good mood because you are tired, or you are. And are you going to have energy after everything to do the homework? And she said, no, probably no. She says, probably no. And I said, well, that's your answer. So first the homework, and then the other activities, no? And as you mentioned, it's just dividing the activities into a logical sequence, no?
Yeah. And I love that, because what you've done there is instead of you walking through the thought process yourself, you're asking her to walk through it by just kind of asking those guiding questions, right? It's scaffolding the responses the way that they're going to be answered. And it's wonderful. That's a perfect example of how to do that, so that she feels like she's coming to the conclusion on her own. Yeah. Even though you've provided the roadmap, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that it's working very well, because many times she surprises me with answers, or even with questions, no? And she challenges sometimes those questions, and she tells me, well, why is that going to happen? And then that's what I explain more. But she wants explanations. She wants to rationalize the things more and understand. And sometimes she even gets to the conclusions, oh, so that's why, for example, you and my mom discuss sometimes. And I said, yes, that's why it happens sometimes.
Yeah, I think that is one of the key components that we often forget about as teens in general are kind of moving into adolescence, is this whole idea of they want to be understood, but they also want to understand. And so if you can remember that constantly with them too, it's the same thing as for adults, right? I want to be heard and understood, and I also want to understand what other people are feeling and doing, so that I can now make my own decisions based on that information. Same thing. So if you're having a conflict with your son or daughter that's in this phase, just tune into that and have those conversations. And more than likely, I would say probably 90% of the time, you're gonna resolve the conflict, because they're being heard and understood, and they also have the why behind your decisions. So
thank you. Yeah. What can parents do when they start noticing that their teenagers are struggling with physical changes, in terms of, probably many times happens in schools, that they make fun of them for whatever reason because of the changes that are happening? So how have you approached those situations?
That's a great question. And this is going to happen, by the way, to every single child, because as kids get into adolescence, this is part of that whole developmental process, is the comparison, because they're comparing themselves to other kids in order to try to figure out what their own identity is. So I have yet to meet a teenager that said that loves every single thing about themselves. There's always something physically that they want to change. Like I know, one of my daughters, for some reason, has this thing about her. Her nose is beautiful, but she thinks her nose is too big. And I think what I want to say to her is, you are insane. You're beautiful. right? But what happens often is that we do say that. So we instead our comeback is, no, that's not true. This is really nice about you, or this is beautiful, or you're, there. Why do you think that? But what that message is when you say that instead of empathizing with them is that you don't really understand. You don't hear me, right? Even though our intention is to try to make them understand that their lens is skewed, they are not seeing reality, right? It doesn't matter because all they hear is, you just don't understand. So instead of contradicting what they're saying, so if for example, my daughter comes to me and says like, I hate my nose, it's so big, instead of saying, no, it's not, it's beautiful, I then start to kind of go down the inquisitive curiosity road of like, well, why, what makes you say that, right? And then then you start engaging in that discussion. So many times you might have that discussion once, and if it comes up again, you kind of pivot or move to a different subject. Start talking about the things that she really is good at, or he really is good at, or enjoys, or passion projects. Because the bottom line is that the core of this is them, again, using that comparison to find their identity. Well, there are so many ways of finding your identity. And one of the really most important ways that research shows us is to find something you're really good at, because then that gives you the sense of accomplishment. And then you realize, oh, I am very good at X, Y, and Z. And that's an internal characteristic versus an external characteristic. So we want them to really focus on those inner characteristics. We want them to grow, their self-esteem and their confidence and things like that. And that's done through being able to try things out, get better at them, set goals for yourself and accomplish those goals. So those are the things that if they start talking about the physical characteristics, we really want to try to give them other things within their lives that are not about the physical, that are about the internal characteristics that they're building, and really focus on those. If they want to talk about how their nose is too big or their skin is not clear, that's okay. You can have those conversations, but have them from the standpoint, not of like, how are we going to fix it or what are you going to do? But just like, okay, well, what can we do to help you feel better? Right? Because those are passing. They're passing. The physical characteristics, they will move past that. And if we can build the internal, then we give them a good foundation of self-esteem and confidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it good that you also try to go back in time and tell them or narrate them that you also struggle with certain characteristics of you? Like, for example, in my case, when I was a teenager, I was overweight, and I struggled a lot with being chubby and make them fun of me. And so what I did is I started to do exercise and I started to lose weight, and then I start to feel better. So if I just tell them that story, or tell her that story, probably, I don't know, she will feel that she can do something of like, I don't know, make her hair in a different way so that the nose looks better, or whatever it is. Wear glasses without the prescription, and probably that's gonna make it better, no?
Yeah, I think that I always advocate for parents to use your stories and share them with your kids, because I think, number one, it makes us human, right? Because I think we can easily get caught up in this trap of like being kind of up on that pedestal where we're dehumanized for our kids. And when they find out that we had similar challenges or that we made mistakes, all of a sudden it kind of brings us down to a level where they feel like they could connect with us a little. So I always encourage that. I do think if we're talking about the physical characteristics, and like, it's definitely a good idea to share. Yeah, I felt that way when I was your age too. Mine was XYZ, feeling overweight, or maybe it was, not like I didn't develop fast enough, or it developed too much, or whatever it was, too fast. Whatever it is, if it's physical, finding ways to also help her understand that it didn't take you changing who you were in order to feel better. That might have been a part of it, But really, it also had to do with understanding your own sense of self. And once you got there, other things made sense as well. Because I think I always want to highlight for our teens that, they have so much that comes out them in terms of changing your physical appearance to meet the ideal, especially for girls, but also for boys, that every time that we can take advantage of having the discussion about turning away from that and turning more to the inner sense of self as your point of reference and kind of your North Star, I always encourage that too. So,
which is something that I also love, because I mean, anything that is intrinsic is in your control. Everything that is intrinsic is in your control, and you can always boost it, make it better, and you can always find things that you are, as you mentioned, you are good at and you enjoy, and just that is going to switch a different release of chemicals that is going to help them to make the other negative chemicals go down. Because also it is when we are comparing ourselves, when we enter into the social network, what it goes up a lot is dopamine, no? And we are driven by that, and that just flooded our brain, and we don't have any kind of power in those moments, because we are just making it higher and higher and higher. So if we just release that dopamine with something that is going to make us feel better inside, we are going to jump off the serotonin, the oxytocin when we relate with our parents. And I think that's going to counterfact the amount of dopamine that we have. No.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. I love what you just said about how all the intrinsic is in our control, because I think that's one of the things for teenagers that often they feel out of control. So they are trying to find ways in their lives to take control and be independent. And that is a really, really powerful thing to teach them, that everything that you have inside, your thoughts, right? The thoughts that you have control over those. You might not have control over everything outside, but you do have it inside. I think that is powerful for them to understand.
Yeah. And what happens with energy and sleep in the teenage years? What have you experienced with them in terms of usually what happens, or I think that's what is the most common symptom, is that they don't want to sleep too much. They just want to go higher and higher in the threshold of going to sleep later. So, and that affects more their mood. No.
Absolutely. So it's really interesting, because what the research tells us about this is that there really is a shift. I forget what age it is. I think it's around 13. I want to say 13. I can't remember the exact age, but their circadian rhythm actually shifts. It literally shifts. So when you see the kids that are moving into the teenage years, and they're like, I'm not tired, and it's like 11 o'clock, and we're like, well, I'm going to bed because I'm exhausted. It really is true. They are not tired because their whole rhythm has shifted. So the reason why we see that they don't really feel like they need that much sleep is not that they don't need the sleep. It's because they're going to sleep later, but they still are forced to get up early because they still have to go to school, right? So if you just let them sleep, like I have one here who goes, if she could, she would go to sleep at 1 and then sleep until 1. Right. And she literally would sleep until 1 o'clock, because she has before, because that's how she's shifted. And it does shift back, just so everybody knows, it does shift back, like around, I think it's like early 20s, kind of when all of this starts to really get all developed too, it shifts back to a normal setting. But during this time period, it all shifts. So it's interesting because from a school perspective, we never take that into account. No. Right. In fact, a lot of high schools start very early. They start at 7:30 in the morning. And that just is not ideal for high school students. Really, they should be starting like 9:10 and going until 4 or 5. But that just is not how it works. So yes, you're right. They want to go to bed later. They probably would even sleep in later if we let them. They really, really need at least 8 to 10 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
And I know there's probably a ton of people that are like, there is no way that my kid's getting that. There is no way that that's happening. But if they can get that amount of sleep, it allows them to consolidate all of the information that they've taken in throughout the day. There's so many benefits to the sleep. And many times I will see kids that have massive anxiety or depression, or it looks like ADHD symptoms. And when we dig a little bit more, I realize, wow, they haven't been sleeping for the past 2 years. They're maybe running on 3 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah.
Well, your body adjusts to that. Your body reacts to that. And it is very difficult. And it can look like all of those other things because your body is trying to figure out, how do I run on empty? Really?
Yeah.
So, that's one of the biggest things that I advocate for parents, is to find a way, get technology out of their room 2 hours before their bedtime. And if they don't fall asleep right away, like I have, my kids are like, I'll give them a book and I'll say, you can read as long as you need to read. Because usually if you read, your body is going to start cueing you to go to sleep at some point. But if you can get the technology out of their room and get off technology completely 2 hours before bed, it does help kind of spark the melatonin in order to get you to fall asleep. I know that's hard because a lot of kids use their phones for alarm clocks, but there are other options. And I just really am a big advocate of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was going to suggest that also, that the reading, I was going to ask that about the reading, because when I was a teenager, I used to read in the night and I completely fall asleep.
Yeah,
Very
it is
quickly.
it's soothing, right?
Yes.
There's a soothing thing about reading.
I couldn't read more than, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 pages, and then goodbye.
Yeah, I know. Same.
I'm training my daughter with meditations at night. So, well, training sounds a little funny, but I am trying to get her used to the kind of soothing at night, and trying to get calm with either stories or meditations. And that works very well for her. No?
Yes, I'm so glad you said that, because I am a huge advocate of that. We were doing reading and stories, with my younger kids, but we also did like guided visualizations at night, which kind of helped. And sometimes just audio books, even stories. I think those are really great. And introducing meditation, especially early on, is a really great way for kids to be introduced to it without feeling like I have to sit and meditate, right? It's really just understanding that this is just a way to stay in the here and now to get your body calm. And so I love that idea. It's great.
It's funny because my daughter usually falls asleep when we are doing a meditation, and she tells me, "No, Dad, I don't want that because I fall asleep." And I just tell her, "Don't worry, your subconscious mind is going to pick the message.
Yeah.
All of the messages. So fall asleep, whatever, and that's it." I mean, she's really easy to sleep, and she gets that from her mom because they sleep very, very well. So
you're lucky.
yeah, they are really, really lucky. I am a light sleeper, so any kind of noise, I just get up or awake. No. And well, and now with the food, what can you tell me about the kind of foods that they crave, and how much should we allow? How much should we control? Or what are the typical cravings that they are going to have, and why do they have those cravings sometimes?
That's a very good question too. I think that a lot of that is dependent on kind of what they've been exposed to before.
Yeah.
Right. So, if we're raising our kids with a fairly balanced diet, there might be some, pushback or revolt against that as they go into teen years, because now it's like, well, I have control over what I eat, and I'm eating, Cheetos or Coke or whatever it is every now and then. But I also think that keeping those discussions open when they say, I'll give you an example. My oldest daughter really loves coffee now. That's her thing. She's 17. She loves coffee. She loves even soda. And we're not a huge soda family because I don't think it's super great for you. But she also, loves kind of like big carb meals and things like that. But then she'll eat those things and then she'll say, oh, my stomach. And so it really kind of opens the door for a conversation, not of like, oh, well, if you wouldn't have eaten that, maybe you wouldn't feel that way, but more about like, I wonder why, and then she say, well, I did have a soda today. Okay, well, what do you think could have been a better option? Like, it's really not about telling her. It's just about circling back to what we talked about before, opening the door for the conversation. And not using an I told you so or you should have type of model, but really just being like curious about it. Well, I know I had a soda the other day and I felt awful like all day long because I haven't had it for so long. My body didn't know what to do with it. And she was like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, okay, well, then maybe that's your clue. So I think having the conversations is important. I also think allowing them the choice, because if you don't allow some choice, they're going to do it when you're not around. Yeah. I mean, that's really the bottom line. So I really believe in being able to offer choices to allow for the conversations of the results, good or bad, because then they're doing it within the controlled piece of that conversation versus doing it outside when you're not there. Yeah. They still might do that, but I think I would rather have her experiment with some foods and see how they feel with her to her body when we can talk about it instead of doing it on her own. So, and I think it's like that for a lot of different things, too. But I think that's part of it. I also think that if they're raised with a really healthy diet, more than likely they're going to default to that most of the time. I think that making sure that you're having conversations about what your food values are as a family. We all have different food values as a family. We don't really talk about them very often, but there's some families that really are not vegetable eaters. There's some families that are pure vegetarians. There's some families that don't have any junk food in the house at all. Right. And so like having those conversations about food values with your kids is kind of important because that's going to be a part of her identity or his identity as they grow older. And they're going to choose whether or not they want to include that as part of their identity or not. And so the more information we can give them, then they become a more informed consumer themselves.
What I have done with my daughter is that I have explained her, even if it's scientific or whatever, I try to explain her, well, why you shouldn't eat those kind of foods? Look at the label and tell me the ingredients. Tell me which ones do you understand?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
And I told her, the names, those names are because they are just chemicals and they are not even for regular people to understand them, because those are the ones that damage you. And let's do an experiment. Try these cookies, these Oreo cookies, that they are addictive, and then see how many you can eat without whatever, no? And she finishes the package. Sometimes eats 6 or the 8, and then 2 days or 3 days apart, and I tell her, well, now eat these kind of cookies. They are from a bakery. They are more natural. They are just regular sugar, and that's it. And she only eats 1 or probably 2 during the day, and she's not craving them, no, or looking for them. And I told her, you saw what happened? That's your answer. Which one is better for you? The Oreos or the other ones? And
I was going to say, what a cool experiment. I think that's amazing. I'm totally going to steal that and try it.
It works really well because now she's advocating for that. And when she goes with her mom and they do the groceries together, and she tells her, Mom, just
read what is behind and see if it's the better choice. And
I
see,
love that.
really
Oh my
funny.
gosh, I love it.
And well, finally, and I think that we can wrap it up with this question. What happens in terms of the exercise? What do you think about trying for the teenagers to try a sport, to join a team, to do something that liberates the energy for them?
Well, so exercise is one of the key components in mental health, especially for teenagers, because it releases the endorphins. It kind of helps balance some of the chemicals that are going, hormones that are going on in their own body. Exercise is so important, as important as sleep, I think. Now, in terms of the type of exercise, that's going to be personal to each person. But I really, really, really love the idea of team sports if kids are interested in it, because team sports gives you the opportunity to practice some of those social connections and situations and conflicts that you have. It also really allows you to have a separate group of friends from your group of friends at school. And the reason that's important, especially for girls, but for boys too, is because the more kind of pods of different friends you have, the easier it is to manage the social drama that goes on with girls. Because inevitably, your daughter is going to be in a group of girls together, and there'll be some gossiping or some drama that's going on between them. And if she's on the receiving end of that, it's really, really hard if that's her only group of people. But if she has maybe a sports group or an art group or whatever it is that she's involved in with other things, church group, then she can take a break from that and move over here and still feel very positive about the social connection she has while she's kind of problem solving what's happening over here. So their self-esteem and confidence doesn't take as big of a hit if they have multiple sources of social reinforcement with friends. So the team sports in general is a really great way to do that, because it's kind of a built-in social circle that you have when you're part of that team. So I think there's a lot of advantages to exercise in sports.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, what can be the final message for teenage moms that they are struggling?
First of all, you can do it. It's going to feel like you can't. I promise. There's going to be some days where you're like, I can't do this anymore. You can do it. There's an end to this long tunnel that you're in. But while you're traveling down the road, I think one of the things I always want to tell moms when we're working together is try to just focus on the connection. If you can keep the connection with your daughter or your son throughout, then you're going to make it to the end with not as many scars, right? Because if you're constantly having an open communication and an open dialogue, and you're giving them the opportunity to ask questions without judgment, to share without judgment, they're going to feel seen, they're going to feel heard, and they're going to feel understood. And that's all that they want, really. So even if they're mad at you, if they know that that's the core of your relationship, the connection is going to remain. So
thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. It was a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we will listen to each other on our next episode. If you have questions, if you have anything that you can ask Kimberly, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on Instagram and TikTok, and that's at nurturing_girls. So there's a little underscore in there. Or you can find me at my website. It's nurturinggirls.com. And I have an email there. You can contact me. I have lots of ways, resources, and things like that. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you. We will post the notes anyway. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.